Hi there, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for our very special webinar tonight on self-care for parents and caregivers. My name is Elizabeth Errico, and I am the Executive Director of the Children's Mental Health Resource Center. And for those of you who are new to us, I want to share with you that we are a nonprofit organization with the mission to provide guidance and resources for the early identification and management of mood disorders, bipolar disorder, and its newly identified phenotype called fear of harm. We fulfill this mission by providing programs and services to families as well as to providers who work with them. These families have often struggled for many years to get accurate information about the circumstances that their children are dealing with. And we support families by being able to provide diagnostic consultation services where we help them understand diagnoses, help them understand what the symptoms are, how to identify the diagnoses, and how to manage them at home. We also provide the same service to providers to assist them in their diagnostic process when they have cases that are complex or are outside of their scope of practice. We also have a school advocacy for mental health program where we work with families who are in need of an IEP, a 504 plan, or additional accommodations and supports at school so their children can succeed there. We have community advocacy for mental health, where we work with a family's existing providers to help them understand additional supports and interventions they could be using that are especially tailored for children and adolescents who are living with mood disorders, bipolar disorder, and FOH. We have a product called the CMHRC Toolkit, which is for symptom, medication, and mood tracking. We also have various membership programs and provider transition support. We do all of these programs and services, and we attempt to keep them at the lowest possible cost for families. Some of them are free, some of them have small fees associated with them, and we supplement those small fees through charitable donations. As a nonprofit, we do rely on the generosity of our community in order to make our work possible. So if you value the work that we do, if you value the free educational resources that we provide during these webinars and our monthly clinical seminars, please show your appreciation by considering a gift during 2024. You can make gifts on our website on a safe and secure fundraising platform at www.cmhrc.org/donate. Now, as I said, tonight we have a very special guest. Her name is Anne Reid. She's a certified life coach. She hosts a television show on Bold Brave TV called Be Happier in Spite of Your Life. Anne, welcome. I'm thrilled to have you here to talk with me about being happier and specifically how that relates to this parent and caregiver self-care, which can be so difficult for families to manage when they have a child in their life who is living with and managing a mental health disorder. So welcome.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth, and thanks CMHRC for allowing me to come tonight and focus on the other important people in the room, and that is the parents. Because so much of the work that we do really is focused around our kids and diagnoses and interactions with their larger communities and whatever. But I do coach on being happier in spite of your life. But due to my own circumstances, I'm the mom of 2 adopted girls. One has genetic disorders, but we didn't know that until she was around 20. The other had some pretty serious learning disabilities, and we did not realize how bad her hearing was until age 24 when I took her for a hearing test. And guess what? She could never distinguish voices. And me, being the mom, like, well, if you don't understand, just ask again. It's something I feel guilty for. I have to admit, don't do guilt often. But anyway, I have dealt with a wide range of experiences with my kids. And I came to CMHRC. Really, my older daughter has been diagnosed with fear of harm. So I've learned a whole lot about that. And I want to welcome you if you have, or if you want to be part of the club. One of the things that most of us say is we found our peeps when we get here, because it's a group that we share wisdom, we share information, we laugh, we cry, and we're always learning and supporting others. So I want to honor you for taking an hour out of your time and being here with us. So that's a little bit about my background. I have a couple of topics. Elizabeth and I are going to do this more as a conversation, but I do want to talk about self-care. I am really committed to community and connection. And I don't know about you, but I know when I was focused on my kids, I was not focused on the other relationships in my life, be partner or the other children or just my friendships and whatever. And it is so important, both for happiness and also for sanity. If we have time, we'll talk a little bit about really knowing yourself and also truly accepting your situation, your dreams versus your reality. And we also might go into one of my favorite tools, which are understanding our operating manuals and how to set boundaries for both ourselves and our kids. So I'm going to start with, I promise it's only going to be about 90 seconds, a deep breath, 3 of them. I can't see you, so you can cheat, but I promise you'll feel better if you do it. It's just 3 long breaths in and 3 long breaths out. And ideally, you'll have your eyes closed. So I'm just going to breathe in for 5. I'll count, and out for 5. And we'll do it 3 times. So ready, set, go. In, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Last one, and really enjoy it. In, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now you can return to the webinar, and you should have a much better connection between your body and your mind. You should be able to focus better, really be present. That little tool, that simple tool, something we do every day, but doing it intentionally is a great de-escalator, both for yourself when your kid's out of control, and if you can get them to do it too. It's amazing how it can change the environment. And I want to share a quote with Anne Reid, who's a well-known author, that says, almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you. So that's kind of your first self-care tip, how to slow down and be present.
So I want to encourage anybody who's watching to put your questions and your comments either into the chat or into the Q&A panel. I'm going to be monitoring that as Anne and I talk, and I will be integrating your questions and comments into our conversation so that she's able to answer questions as we go. You know, Anne, we both know from our work how challenging it can be for parents and caregivers to engage in their own self-care because they have prioritized the needs of the people that they love and they care about and who they're responsible for taking care of. And that's a noble thing. But at the same time, we've also seen over and over again the burnout, the stress, the added hardship that comes from not engaging in some kind of self-care. And I know one thing that I hear over and over again from parents is that they're kind of resistant to hearing about self-care because they think they don't have time for it. They think it's not something that they can integrate. And so I'm hoping that you can start talking us through why it's important, why we need to do it, how we can do it easily, all of the tips and tricks that you have learned over the years, and I know that you use in your work as a life coach.
I don't think we'll do them all in one session, but anyway, we will start. And it's really, I have to honor you for being here tonight. This is a form of self-care. It's disengaging from your normal environment. Maybe you have headphones on or your door shut, maybe as minimal as that. You're learning. You're with a community of like-minded people who are all seeking information. So give yourself a pat on the back for being here. That is part of self-care. I will pause it, and I can't see the chat, but Elizabeth can tell me what the response is. How many of you can be honest enough to admit that you take care of your child better than you do yourself? You can just put yes or put your hand up or do whatever, because I can't see it.
Yeah, but we've got a bunch of hands going on.
I'm sure. And if I could figure out how to do it, mine would be one of them. So, yeah. I've really learned most of this the hard way. All right. Why don't we take care of ourselves? Elizabeth alluded to it. We're parents, we're caretakers, we're guardians, whatever, and we will do almost anything for our child. But a diagnosis like a mental health disorder, a genetic disorder, physical disabilities, even some of the learning issues, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So you have to learn to live with it on a daily basis. And I know when we're, for lack of a better term, kind of careening from expert to expert, you're going to psychologist, you're going to speech, you're going that, whatever. It's really hard to see it on a continuum as opposed to what you have to get done that day. So, but why is it important? Almost number one is our own health. And my older daughter is now totally disabled. And as I say, will be living with me for the rest of my life. So this is long-term for some of us. It's not as bad as it was during periods before we knew what was going on. But I have to take care of myself in order to be around to take care of her. And that's just based on longevity and adulthood. Another thing we don't talk about very much, and again, I'll raise my hand, when I'm tired and stressed, I am incredibly irritable and not at all patient. That is not good for anybody in the household, particularly our kid and ourselves.
And you and I have talked about that so many times. This idea that so many parents in our community have been, and I'll just be blunt, they've been shamed and blamed by providers, being told that the troubles that their children are facing are their fault, that they're not parenting correctly. And if only they,
I wish you.
if only they did X, Y, or Z, their child would be fine. And so I think it's a hard thing sometimes for parents to hear what we're saying on this, which is that how we feel is something that our children pick up on. And when we're
Yes.
tired and irritable and cranky and we haven't done the things that we need to do to care for ourselves, it it has a domino effect and it influences their ability to cope. Now, that is not at
Yes.
all to suggest that that parents are to blame, but that as we always say, that parenting is bidirectional. It's not one way. And so when we are taking care of ourselves, it might help some parents to hear that taking care of ourselves is a part of the process of taking care of our children because it's an essential prerequisite.
Yeah, I agree. And it really, if you think about it, when you're in a calm and patient place, it really decreases the tension in the whole household, and particularly like the dyad between parent and child, which is the one where we're really focusing. But if we can keep ourselves happier, some of this stuff is really tough. I know that. I mean, it's not something any of us said, oh, that's what I want, to have kids who have long-term issues. But we can learn how to have light and joy in our lives too. I mean, think about the last time you really laughed. I mean, like a good belly laugh. I know when I've gotten really focused on the 10, seemed like 10 probably was sometimes, experts I was trying to get my girls to, there wasn't any time for just sitting down reading a comic book or watching a funny movie or calling up a friend and telling jokes or something. And it's just so important to normalize positivity and self-care and calmness in your house. It's as
Mhm.
important as all the other things we're doing.
Yep,
And then the child
absolutely.
is often more available for whatever resources they're being offered or interventions that they're being given because they're not as anxious and uptight.
Hmm. Hmm.
You agree, Elizabeth? I mean, that
I
just,
I sure do, and I always love it when you use the word available because
yes,
it's such a reminder that our children are not they're not just uh, an inbox waiting to receive all of the information that we have to give them, and they're not just a receptacle into which we dump things. They have to be in a place where they're
right,
available, capable of absorbing the information that we want to give them, whether it's on how to care for themselves or just the simple fact that dinner is ready. They need to be in a space where they can be responsive first, and that's what I hear when I hear you use the word available.
yeah. Well, it's if someone, and that includes us, is extremely anxious and fearful and overwhelmed, most of us could not sit in a calculus classroom and learn very quickly.
Right.
And, or you can insert your own subject if math happens to be your thing. But, just think about it. And particularly with most of our kids being required to have some kind of schooling, when we have unintentionally added to their baggage and their emotional stress, it's a piece of our job, but it doesn't get talked about very much, I don't think. And being able to stand back and kind of calm down and do the best you can every day and forgive yourself when you have a day, you know, and I'm going to venture and make a really crazy prediction. But my guess is if you actually missed one of your interventions this week, it would not change the trajectory of your child's life.
So, Anne, we have a couple of questions that have come in that I want to address. The first is that we have someone who's talking about the fact that her child has been diagnosed with multiple different diagnoses. There's depression, there's anxiety, there's also some autonomic nervous system dysfunction. And she's talking about the fact that there's a connection between mental and physical health, and is wondering if you can shed some light on this connection and how to cope with the stress when you're getting multiple diagnoses. And before I just turn it over to you to answer that, I want to say to this person that everyone in our community can relate to what you're
Yeah.
describing. And I hope that you know that you are not alone, because in the journey to finding an accurate diagnosis and effective treatment, most families go through about 10 years of lots and lots of different providers, all of whom are saying, no, it's this, no, it's that, no, it's the other thing. And each one of them has a treatment plan that they tell you is going to work. And most families find that the truth lies somewhere in the middle of that complex matrix. And so we hear you, we understand you, and you were not alone in that. So Anne, can you shed some light on
Yeah,
how to cope with the stress
I
of
will,
multiple
but
diagnoses?
I'm going to tag on to what you just said, Elizabeth. And the two things that ultimately ended up being my girls' biggest issues, nobody knew anything about when I first started taking them to school because they're in their mid late 20s. I mean, fear of harm was not out in the public domain. The hearing test that my daughter had was not available when we first took her for a hearing and when she was like 6. So trying to get the right diagnoses it's a journey. And as a parent who's been through a lot of it, the one thing I will say is trust yourself.
Mm.
And this isn't part of my taking care, but it is sort of, I'm going to slide it in on caretaking because we're all, I mean, we call it no stone left unturned. And I know if you're on this webinar, you're seeking, you're searching, you want to learn, it's all good. And your kids will be so much further ahead. But there's also the scattershot of trying to figure out what they have and put the name. And I will tell you of my support group, there's not one who doesn't have autoimmune diseases, mood disorders, some have personality disorders, some are on the spectrum. I mean, we can rattle off a whole group of initials. And if a professional tells you something I mean, most of us don't want to hear some of the things we hear, so you kind of have to be honest with yourself about, oh, I'm just ignoring that because I didn't like it. But once you've worked through that, if you really think it doesn't fit your child, I give you permission to kind of put it to the wayside and keep looking for what seems to be a more accurate or conclusive or cohesive diagnosis. And there
Anne, can I
probably
just
will be multiple. It's not going to end up being one.
right. I just want to sort of again tag on to that what you're saying. Yes, and it's what we talk about all the time, that you are the expert in your child. You may be taking your child to someone who's an expert on hearing, or to someone who is an expert on mood disorders, or someone who's an expert on gastrointestinal difficulties. But in the end, you are the expert on your child, and you are the one at the center of that matrix, coordinating all of those providers who aren't talking to each other. And so
Yes.
you are the expert. And so taking care of yourself again becomes an act of service to your child, because you have to be the one to be coordinating all of that. And that's extremely, extremely important. Now, and the other question we have here is about um, how do you help yourself when you feel like all you know is taking care of others, especially after your children are adults and may no longer need you the same way as they did when they were a child? And so I just want to validate this before I turn the reins over to Anne and say that the ultimate goal, of course, is to have children who are self-sufficient. That may not happen for everyone in our community. Our children may need varying degrees of continued support. Um, but there is a point at which some needs get taken care of by others. Some needs will get taken care of by our child. And so as they grow, our the demands of our caregiving do change and evolve. And it is very important to be able to maintain that self-care throughout. So Anne, there's this idea of the physical and the mental, the multiple diagnoses, and this evolving change that happens when we suddenly find ourselves with maybe a little extra time.
Well, speaking for myself, I could probably get a gold star as a caretaker, which is both my blessing and my curse. And that's for pretty much anything that comes into my environment, cats, dogs, kids, friends, whatever. So it's something that I just have to be conscious about and really run through a checklist in my head. Am I the only person that can do this? Do I have the bandwidth to do it right now? Does the other person want me to do it? And it's part of my ongoing journey. The other thing is, and this may help you if you're talking about kids who've left the nest or whatever, but there is a difference between being responsible to someone and for someone. And if we are younger kids, we are really responsible for them. And that is a totally, we're managing their world. As kids, and this is also the neurotypic ones, it isn't just the ones in our population, but as they get older, there needs to be more being responsible, not for them. Which may mean there's some things you still keep up with or you do for them because they like you to do it and you like to do it, but you don't need to be enmeshed and taking care of everything. And one of the things I frequently say in coaching, which no one likes to hear, is honestly, the only person you can change is yourself. So this is going to be inner work that you have to do.
Well, and I love hearing you say that because as a mental health professional, when someone comes into my office for therapy, I say the same thing. Like, we can't change anyone who's not in the room. So if you're here to change someone else in your life, then this isn't going to work. You have to change you. And it's a very challenging thing to hear. But when I think about that in connection to what you just said about awareness, understanding yourself, knowing why you're doing something when you're doing it. It sort of goes back to that term you used earlier, the operating manual, your operating manual. Can you
Yes.
talk about that a little bit more?
All right, this is actually a coaching term, and I'm going to read the actual definition of it because I usually make it too long and mangle it. Nobody knows what I just said. So, an operating manual, we all know what they are, like when you go to a business or a fast food chain on how to run their kitchen, or the hospital for how to get patients, out quickly if there's an emergency. But it's simply an instruction guide that we have for other people. And it's generally unstated and often unconscious. And why do we have it? Because we like them to behave in a certain way so that we feel better. It doesn't really have much to do with them, and it has a lot to do with us. And when I was first introduced this concept, it was like, wow, something I've lived with the whole time. And I'll give you an example. Most of you have to live with someone where there's a battle of, is the toilet seat left up or is the toilet seat down? I mean, it can be the really simple things. Uh, Another one that you might find is actually a choice is that our kids have to go to school every day.
Uh,
I mean, listen, my mom was a teacher. It never occurred to me that you could stay home from school unless you had about 104 temperature and couldn't get out of bed. I mean, but we have a lot who end up homeschooling and doing
yes, we do.
education a different way. Um, Another one, and I'm pulling these into things that a lot of us are dealing with. I mean, you apply it to anything in your life, but family celebrations.
Mm,
Most of the time, they're noisy. There are a lot of people. It's congested. It's people's anxieties up. Whoever isn't getting along ends up sitting next to each other on the table and fighting, whatever. When you overlay that kind of situation with, oh, and then the expectation generally was, at least in my ex's family, was the kids had to stay at the table for the entire meal. They were not allowed to have their iPod, or my younger daughter always wanted to bring something to draw, what have you. And so my poor kids are supposed to be sitting at the table, just almost being seen and not heard. Now, my operating manual, I mean, my in-laws had their operating manual about appropriate table behavior. My operating manual was I was going to be a good in-law and my kids were going to be well behaved to do whatever my in-laws said or how we're supposed to go. And those situations ended up being so toxic
mm,
and so anxiety producing that my household was invariably in tears and yelling at each other before we even got there. I mean, it was horrible.
mm.
So when you get out of all these things that you're doing that other people expect you to do, and some you expect yourself to do, and stand back and say, you know, I have a choice about that. And I decided that too large a group, particularly for my older daughter, has severe social anxiety, was not a good thing
Mm.
unless she wanted to go. And you can learn, and this is going to be fast. I mean, we could spend a month learning how to set boundaries, but there is a way to deal with it. First, you need, and I'm applying all this to our kids, okay? But goes across everything in your life. Really a realistic assessment of what your child is capable and not capable of. And start from there. I mean, to have my younger daughter sit still for an hour and not have something to draw or to do with her hands, and she couldn't fidget and whatever, she was incapable of that. She's still incapable of that. So then you really adjust your expectations, change your operating manual to what the reality is. And then you design your life around it or a situation, again, because I know a lot of us have holidays and events and whatever. Family, and it's an area, actually, I think there's some other talks that we've done on it. But if you did want to set some boundaries around what you've decided is an appropriate and conscious operating manual around your child, you set a boundary. And that is something we consciously choose to protect ourselves or our kids from infringement on our literal or emotional property. And they're really for our emotional and physical self-care. Yes, Elizabeth?
I'm hoping so you're talking about setting boundaries to protect our children, to adjusting expectations so that our children can be successful, running interference to some degree, I think is what you're talking about with outside people and what demands they're putting on your children. Tie this back for me to self-care. How does setting boundaries, how does adjusting expectations, how does adjusting consequences or being that person to say, hey, my child can't do that, how does that qualify as self-care?
Well, in a very selfish sense, and I think self-care is self-full, not selfish, but in the part that's all about me, my anxiety went down phenomenally.
Mm.
I mean, it was like a breath of fresh air. And my older daughter now, I let her choose for each event if she wants to go or not.
Mm.
And maybe a third of the time she goes and a third she doesn't.
Mm.
And it's totally up to her. Most of our situations, we can take two cars so somebody can run her home. I can then enjoy it because I'm not sitting there worried about her all the time. She is much more sociable when she goes because she knows she can leave.
Mm.
I mean, it's just amazing to the whole environment. It's like you're just that pressure and what have you. And so, as far as the self care, it's been freeing for me because it doesn't make me nervous about social situations with my kids.
So it
And
sounds as though what you're saying is that by giving yourself the freedom, parent a little differently, you are actually caring for yourself and giving yourself room to breathe and to be
yes,
able to care for yourself.
yes.
Hmm. Now,
And it's also a situation if there are a group of people at an event that I really want to see for my own. I know another thing we talk about is community and connection, but I wanted to see and spend time with, then I'm not like all anxious and looking over my shoulder, knowing that my daughter wants to leave early or is not going to
right.
be able to handle the large group or whatever. So, then I'm relaxed. I can enjoy it. And again, I made arrangements for her to go home a different way when she decides she wants to go. So it's like it just really opens up the world to be able to be present and to do things without them being so toxic and overwhelming.
I think what you're talking about here is really quite radical. I think that when people hear, no, it is. I
I
think
know,
when
I'm
people
just,
hear self-care, they imagine that we're going to be talking about taking more bubble baths and
and
treating
I'm all
yourself
for it.
to a,
And your
right,
cups of tea and your walks
right,
in the wood,
right.
I'm all
But
for it.
but really you're talking about self-care as a concept that
And a
starts
conscious
with
decision.
exactly, which starts with a mindset,
Yes.
which starts with how you conceive of yourself as an individual, how you conceive of yourself as a parent, and maybe, I think you've alluded to this, maybe not combining the two all of the time, and recognizing that just because you're a parent or the parent of a child with different needs, that doesn't mean that you're not still an individual who has her own or his own needs.
And that was a hard one to come to as a great codependent caretaker.
Hmm.
That is something um and particularly for me, just because I know who I am, that's like working against who I've been most of my life. But it's also for me part of the most rewarding and the most freeing and allows me to be an entity to myself as a human being, and to also parent better and be responsible to my adult children. I still have some things I have to be responsible for, but it's been a huge shift, just due to age. But it's, when you have a choice about something and it's conscious, you can change and you can do what you need to do and take care of yourself too.
Well, and I think that's what's radical about this idea, because we could sit here and we could give everybody a list of, breathing exercises and bubble baths to try and new, comfy sweatshirts and how to take your, your yoga, moves to the next level. But in the reality is that the true self-care begins with recognizing the reality of your
And
circumstances and
yeah,
adjusting how you are engaging with them, the world, your children, expectations, and all the other things that are around you. And making that mental shift is really foundational in terms of being able to prioritize your own needs when you're faced with having to take responsibility for and have responsibility to others.
yeah. And it doesn't mean, nothing in life is perfect, right? It doesn't mean when your kids, no matter how old, are throwing up some night that you're not going to be up most of the night with them and taking care of them. You're still doing those things. You would do it really for anybody, but it's not all of who I am anymore. I'm not just a mother. I,
That I think is one of those parts that's really hard for folks in our community. Not because they don't not because they think they're only a parent, but because the needs that their children have crowded out
yeah,
all of those other things that are those tethers back to who we were before, who we are outside, who we are when we're not with our children. And when you are the parent to a child who has a higher level of need, it becomes very difficult to see yourself as an individual. And I think what I'm hearing from you is that self care really starts with not forgetting who you are, and that being a fully present caregiver isn't the same thing as putting away who you are as an individual.
yes. And I think there's another part, and I'm rolling it into caregiving, and it's been part of my journey. And I actually hadn't ever seen this anywhere. So it's something that's kind of evolved for me, but was really being honest with my grief around what I thought my parenting experience was going to look like and what it ended up looking like.
Right.
And that I didn't realize, maybe even to 2 or 3 years ago, how much sadness I really had that I had to deal with. And, again, if you're like me, your image of being a parent is a perfect infant comes home, sleeps through the night about, 2 months old. And if they're fear of harm, they never sleep through the night, but you know, and then they go to school and they're the most popular in the class and they do well academically and, get recruited by their top college and, captain or whatever sports team and blah, 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 blah. It's what I thought it was going to look like or hoped it was. And that was so far from my reality. And I can remember sitting, I think it was at a field hockey game or something, my younger was playing. And all the parents were sitting there all upset because one of their sons had gotten a B plus in some class and wasn't going to get into Harvard and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, my daughter got a B plus in any class. I'd be standing up and cheering, you know. But there, you know, would any of us have signed up for what we got at the beginning? Probably not. And yet, like most hard things in life, it can be incredibly rewarding. I wouldn't be doing the coaching I'm doing now. I wouldn't have met one of the most phenomenal groups, my personal support group. You know, it's everything has its gifts, and you really can develop some purpose out of the things you survive and help others. And that to me, I mean, that in a way too is self-care. It's like, okay, I can sit here and be miserable about this and watch all my friends' kids get married, have kids, you know, make $gazillion a year, to travel around the world, whatever they're doing. And meanwhile, I have one who's never going to leave the bedroom of my house. And, you know, I can be miserable about it, or I can turn that into something where I
Well,
can help others who,
yeah, I think you're really talking about that transition from balancing expectations of others and having that sense of freedom that I can make a different choice. I don't have to meet those expectations, to really looking at the expectations that we hold. I always say that when when we have our children, they are perfect. They start out perfect. And then, as you know, even with every single child who has ever existed ceases to be perfect at some point.
yes,
That's just how human beings are. So we have these babies who are perfect to start with, but they're not really. It's our expectation. We're
right,
imposing perfection on them. And as they grow, being able to adjust our expectations to meet who they are and who this
right.
person is who's growing up in our house, and being able to let go of what really are unrealistic ideas about what our children, whatever their challenges or not may be, they're never going to meet our expectations because they're their own people.
I know. It's like I had some quotes. We either make ourselves miserable or we can make ourselves strong. The amount of work is the same. And that's Carlos Castaneda. But I love that one, you know.
Mm.
So, you know, you can look at it as learning. And I do understand the complete exhaustion that can come with it. And I really work with parents. I mean, I have a tagline of feeling helpless, hopeless, overwhelmed, and alone. And it's easy to end up feeling that way. And sometimes all four at the same time. And when
Right.
you, you know, and working through and getting proper diagnoses helps, I think, because we all want answers. But also, most of the parents that are on this call, I would assume, do not have any life-threatening issues with their kids. So if you got a diagnosis this month or next month, it's not going to really make any difference. It probably make a difference if you got a couple of years from now, because you see kids if they are improperly diagnosed, which mine were. Um, Things would have been much easier for them. The interventions would have been more appropriate for
Well,
what they had. But
and we're coming to the end of our time, and so one of the things I'm hoping is, as I said, this is a really radical shift in perspective that you're talking about. Self-care not as tasks that you check off on a daily to-do list, but self-care as a rewiring of the way you think about your expectations and your responsibilities. That's a hard thing to do. Now, I know that you have a program that you're developing, for parents and caregivers. It's a daily program of self-care. Would you tell us a little bit about it?
sure, because I've met so many parents that are grappling with this. Might be who I just happen to hang out with. But anyway, and everybody wanted help. I kind of back with some of my happiness coaching. And I've created a 4-week course. It is virtual, so you can do it at home whenever you want. There are 5 really, it's a little video on a topic and then some questions, call them thought-provoking questions, to really think about things. So 5 days a week, you get one of these videos for 4 weeks. And then I also run a parent support group. I do that once a week. And, we can either do another topic. They range. A lot of times people have been bring problems. They'll share their own wisdom. I mean, I can't believe how much I learn. But I tried to do something knowing how tight time was for a lot of people, because you can do this any time of day, if you're a morning person or a night person or whatever. And if anybody is interested in talking to me about that, I would do a free half-hour consult just to describe it more and see if it's something that is interesting to you and if it's a fit. And my social media person is ended up with COVID, so there are a couple of things being updated, but the easiest way to reach me is to send an email to Anne, A-N-N-E, at Reid Coaching. Reid is R-E-I-D, coaching.com. And just ask, and hopefully maybe next week even I'll have Calendly back up and more of the description on the website. But anyway, yeah, because you know what? We don't have to live in as much pain as a lot of you are and suffer as much as you do. I promise you don't have to. It's
Right.
optional.
Right. And do you want to tell us a little bit about your show that you have on Bold Brave
Yeah.
TV? That's on Tuesdays at 3 o'clock Eastern time in the afternoons. Be happier in spite of your life.
Yes. Well, actually, and then it goes out over about 30 platforms, only about 10 of which I remember. It's on Spotify, YouTube, Roku, Apple Podcast, Apple TV, Podcast Addict, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So probably wherever you're watching, you can get the replays. And I bring in guests, actually Elizabeth and the other founder of CMHRC are going to be on my show. What is it, April 27th, live to talk about the new palliative parenting course, which I'm really excited about. But I bring people in. I want my guests to leave having learned something, feel more hopeful, and feel inspired. I have a friend who had a stroke on Interstate 95 on Easter morning. Have had people who've come in with autoimmune diseases, people who are in recovery at various stages. It's a diverse group. I try to find people who inspire me and make me realize how lucky I am every day. So I've enjoyed doing that. I've met some phenomenal people just in my guest.
And we have a question that just popped up. Can you share coping strategies for single parents on making yourself a priority?
I have a lot of admiration for single parents, and it is super tough. Part of the time I was, it just has to be a commitment. And whether you carve out 5 or 10 minutes a couple of times a day, and you can do the drink your cup of tea or your bubble bath or meditate or read. There also, we didn't cover it, and it's not something I actually knew existed, but there is respite care, and that could be either formal or informal. But I would strongly encourage you to talk to whether it's friends or some relatives or whatever, and see if you can get, maybe it's only an hour at a time beginning. I don't know the age of your kids, but really make it a commitment to figure out ways that you can fill yourself back up. There
And
is also
and
formal respite care, which
yeah,
is
that's what I was going to
governmental.
say.
And I know I'm in New York State. I know my county offers a lot of services for that.
Yeah.
Um, but
if
I,
you check with your state, different states have different programs for respite care for parents, so that you can get the state funded. It's a state, usually a state funded program where you can get people who can come in and stay with your child for certain periods of time so that you can get a break.
yeah, and that's a wonderful resource, which, as I said, I did not even know existed when I was going through. But I would, and psychologically, it'll make a huge difference for you if you can figure out 3 backups, even if you don't use them. But if you knew that your sister was good for a half hour and your mom might be good for an hour, and you talked to your state and found out that you could have respite care if you need a weekend, even just knowing it's there, it can be a huge relief. And I do honor you because it is not easy, particularly if your child's young and you really have kind of the 24-hour care. But this
And
is not a sprint, it's a marathon. So you're going to have to figure it out.
right, and I want to just tag on to that I know that for a lot of parents, when they hear you have to prioritize it, you just have to make the commitment and the choice. It can sound like a put off. It can sound like the responsibility for dealing with this is just being thrust right back on them, and what they're really looking for is help trying to do that. And I know that, I know there's that impulse to say, like, if somebody says to me that I have to just make the commitment, they don't understand my life.
Yeah.
And what I can tell you is from working with countless families is that every single parent who has gotten to the other side where their child has been accurately diagnosed with, regardless of what that diagnosis is, has been accurately diagnosed, is getting into good treatment. They're stabilizing. The chaos is being reduced and the quality of life is being improved. Every single one of those parents starts to take the time that they have neglected all along for themselves, and they look back and say, you know what, I could have. I
Yeah.
could have taken a little bit more time for myself. I was so frantic that I couldn't disengage. Um, and sometimes you can't leave physically. If you're the only adult, neurotypical or neurodiverse or whatever your child may be, there are times when every single parent is the only adult available and you cannot walk out the door. So we understand that. But there are ways, and I think that's why what Anne's proposing here resonates, is because we recognize that there are ways to shift our mindsets. There's ways to shift our ways of thinking. There's ways to shift the way that we engage our environment that actually turns out to be an act of care for ourselves. There's an old maxim in mental health. In any situation, you have the choice to accept it, change it, or leave it. And every challenge that we're faced with boils down to those three choices. And to some degree, being able to recognize that even if the action you're taking is accepting that this is my reality right now, there's an empowering self care in knowing that you're choosing to be there for it and you're
Yeah.
choosing to accept it. So
Yeah.
hopefully that
It's
helps.
tough. I don't want to minimize how tough it is. But if you even put 5% of the effort into finding self care or creating self care for yourself that you do for your kid, you'll be much healthier and much
Yes.
able to deal with everything else.
Mm-hmm. So, Anne, I want to thank you for being here, and I want to honor the time that everybody else took to join us and to listen to your really forward-thinking and progressive concepts on self-care. Hopefully, this was helpful. I know it was for me to be reminded of all of this good
All the
stuff.
stuff.
Um, and so, Anne, again, if anybody wants to reach Anne, she can be found at Anne, ANNE, at Reid, REID coaching.com. She also has a website with the same, name,
Yeah.
reidcoaching.com. You can find her there. You can also find her. She volunteers and runs a drop-in group for us once a month. It's called Lunch and Learn. If you follow us on social media, you'll be able to find the links to sign up for her Lunch and Learns. I think they're around midday on the first Tuesday of
It's
the month, I think.
12:30, I think.
Yeah, 12:30 Eastern time on the first Tuesdays of the month. As I said, you can find that on social media. You can join Anne there for a quick chat. And as she's generously offered to give members of our community a free consultation. So if you're in need of additional support, by all means, Anne is a wonderful resource. So thank you everyone for being here.
I'm going to leave you with one quote since I started. It's that you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. And that's C.S. Lewis. And that's one that I have up on my bulletin board right now.
Beautiful. Thank you, Anne.
But thank
And
you and thank everybody.
yes, thank you so much to everyone for being here. We look forward to seeing you next time. Next month, our, I'm blanking. Next month, next week, we have a clinical seminar that we're doing for professionals as well as families that covers the myth of misbehavior. This is where we're going to look at understanding the difference between willful chosen behaviors and the symptoms and signs of symptoms that appear with mental health challenges. That's next week. And then in March, yes, our webinar is on with the author, Sarah Schley. She wrote the book Brainstorm, From Broken to Blessed on the Bipolar Spectrum. She's going to be with us to discuss her book. And then she will be joining us for our April book club. So if you're interested in hearing her speak and then being able to talk directly to her, you can sign up for our April book club, which takes place on the third Thursday of the month. You can find information about all of this and more on our website, cmhrc.org, under the free resources tab, as well as the services and programs tab. We look forward to seeing you with us again. We welcome you to our community, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a
Thank you.
great night. Bye.